challenges you face in undertaking your plan?
I think I tapped on our a lot of our constraints, but I think it's important to note to everyone here that I think the most important, it's not constraints. I think it's just different needs and interests and priorities. Yeah, I think for residents, I think it's important in these kinds of plans and efforts is the constraint is making sure we hear from the residents how they want to use the creek. So I think it's like making sure we get enough outreach and information back to us that are planning these efforts and implementing. So I think that's one thing that I think is important to note. I think for nonprofits, I think one of the things that the message is that that I want them, like the Heal the Bays of the world, to keep dreaming, to keep pushing for the big dream, the big challenges that forcing us to do our job better. And it's for them they have a different focus, and we have sometimes limited funds, so how can we fulfill all that? So I think that's a constraint, is that because we have to fulfill a lot of objectives, sometimes we don't fulfill all of them. I think for public agencies, I think the constraint is we always have limited funds. And we have different priorities, and some of us, like I have a unique opportunity that I work on one thing. And most people here, the city, the counties, and other agencies have multiple things they have to deal with. They have to deal with jobs, they have to deal with health issues, they have to deal with so many issues. So, their priority sometimes can't be building greenways and parklands along the creek. But so the constraint is trying to get the different public agencies to come together and focus and bring all their limited resources to the table. So that's a constraint that we encounter a lot, is trying to get people to focus as this is a number one priority with so much in these hard times. I think for us, a constraint is with developers is they always think we want the whole, we're a public agency, so we come here, to say that one of the constraints is we're not always one or the other. It's looking at it, how can we have, we have practical ways of working. How do we, one request for us from developers is not just, let us buy the land and create it onto parkland. It's more the question is, how can you have developers get the word out to them, like Brooke has mentioned today, is that when they're talking about their plan, a lot of times the parkland or the creeks is always what's the land I don't need that I can give to public agencies. So the question that I ask of developers, the number one constraint, is asking them to think about in their plans how they can integrate the creeks, these watersheds, into their projects. Not necessarily that we have to do it, but just that they know ahead of time when they're developing their plan that this becomes part of their amenity, not part of their problem, that it's competing interests. How do we integrate our goals into, so part of my job is always to come in and try to get them to even think about how this can actually be a benefit to their projects, how it can create more revenue, how it can create a better experience for the users. So constraint is trying to get them to see that it's not us against them all the time. And the number two constraint with developers is that we're going to try to take and with private property owners is that we're going to try to take their land because we're the government. And actually it's, we like to pay, we have to pay because we use public funds. We have to pay fair market value, and we have to, the funds that I have access to are limited to, you have to have a willing seller and it has to be a fair market value. So I think that's our second constraint, is that a lot of times development thinks it can't integrate parkland into their projects. So those are some of the things that we encounter.